So good evening, everybody. My name is Christina Bell, and I am with the Atlantic Institute. We are a dialogue organization based out of South Carolina. Our goal is to build bridges of understanding between people from different backgrounds. We have tonight a special dialogue evening with the author of Secrets of Divine Love, Helwa, and Akif is going to I think most of us know Akif, but I'll introduce Akif here momentarily. He is the president of Atlantic Institute, and we're going to let him speak and get the evening started for us. So go ahead, Dr. Aydin.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessing be upon you all. I see some of the faces that I have not seen for a long time. I wish that we were able to be in person to hug you and greet you all. But it is wonderful to be able to get together, at least over the Zoom virtually. So tonight, I'm so honored and very excited about this opportunity to be able to host Sister Helwa. I'll call her sister, if she would accept my way of addressing her. I'm sure, and the way that in fact, I'm so excited because I was really not honestly expecting this going to happen. I read her book. The way that I read her book, hold on, how it's kind of really showing it the way. So, you know that the Amazon, like the based on your interest brings different kind of marketing tools. And I was on Amazon at one time, and I saw the Secrets of Divine Love. It seems that Amazon figured out my interest. So, and I look at the book, it's kind of interesting because I teach Introduction to Islam at Furman Ali. So anything related to Islam is always in my interest. And I saw the book, I had not heard about it. And I just kind of look at the reviews and look at, the content. It was very interesting, and I ordered immediately. And after I received the book and I started to read it as a Muslim, by the way, I'm a Muslim. And so this is a book about spiritual journey into the heart of Islam. And as I read the book, it was very fascinating, different reading. I have read many, many books on Islam in English and in Turkish, which is my native language. So this book was very different from the other books I have read, even though the content, the knowledge was quite familiar. It's really nothing too much new to me in terms of what's there, but the way it was presented, the way it was really put together was so fascinating to me. And I was so impressed, and I had, really underlined many of the parts. And immediately I started to share with other people, with the friends. I bought an order from Amazon to other friends, gifted them. So this book became one of the kind of books that on my desk, and to share with other people and to use in my class at Ali, part of my teaching. So when I was searching about the author, Sister Helwa, and I couldn't really find much about her. So I couldn't see her picture. I couldn't see much about her background. But there was a blog, seems to belong to her and the book. And through that blog, I tried to reach and send a message to see if I was able to really reach her. And I got really in a few hours, maybe after my message, I got a response from her. I was really, not expecting any response, to be honest, but I tried to, at least, try and see if there was going to be anyone to respond. She by herself responded to my message very quickly. So I was, again, very impressed with a very humble response. And I offer if she would be willing to speak through Atlantic Institute, and she accepted. Now we are here tonight. So this is kind of the short story, how we really got her to be connected with our foundation, Atlantic Institute of South Carolina. And before I really just pass on her, we, through Atlantic Institute, we also organize a book club through Secrets of Divine Love book. We intended to have one session of the book club, but the participants love it so much and it happened we did 3 times rather than one. So one of the participants, lawyer Mr. Carl Miller, he is Muller here. So he was one of the readers, a part of the book club. And as a non-Muslim, I just want him to, if possible, to welcome Sister Helwa and to share his impressions and his comments on the book. Then we can let Sister Helwa to start her presentation. Yes, Carl.
Thank you, Keith. And before I say anything else, let me thank Sister Helwa for not only agreeing to be here tonight with us, but also for writing such a wonderful book, which opened my eyes to many things that I had not known before. My background is that I grew up in the Lutheran Church, and after I got married, I became involved in the Presbyterian Church, but in both instances, very much Christian background. Really did not know much about Islam, but I knew Akif, and Akif brought this book to my attention. And so because I knew him and had confidence in him, I bought the book and I began to read the book. And as I began to read the book, I was frankly amazed because so much of it was similar to my Christian background, which came as something of a surprise to me, although perhaps it should not have. So we suggested that we have a book club to study it. And as Akif said, we planned one session, but the book was so fascinating that it grew into 3 sessions. As I said, it opened my eyes to many things. So I've passed the book along to friends and relatives and suggested that they read it so that they might have the same experience. And I look forward very much to hearing what Sister Helwa has to say to us tonight. And I appreciate very much your willingness to be here with us.
Thank you very much for sharing, Carl. Let's see, Sister Helwa, if you don't mind going ahead and introducing yourself and letting us know a little bit about the inspiration behind your book and what you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Akif and Brother Akif and Carl and Christina and everyone on the call. Thank you so much for having me. I always feel it's a gift to be in community, so I'm grateful for that. In terms of the inspiration of the book, I kind of mention it inside the book about feeling the prayer of someone out in the world and realizing that so many of my prayers have been answered through people that I loved, people that I would call friends, and complete strangers. And something about that mysterious connection that we all have and the impact of that, it stirred something in my soul. And so I always say that part of the reason I'm not on camera and part of the reason this is a pseudonym is because it feels like prayers wrote the book, and so many of the prophets that came before and the guides and their inspiration throughout time. As Brother Akif said very clearly, these ideas are not new. And I think the best way I've described it just to myself is it's like going into a field and picking flowers. Sometimes people attribute those flowers to you, but you know that you pick them. You didn't plant them or water them. You just pick them. And so I hope at least this book is like a little bouquet of inspiring things that I've experienced in my faith. So that was kind of my intention. And in terms of being here with you today, the message that it felt on my heart was the idea of divine love in everyday life. And this has been something that's been one of the most transformative thoughts and experiences in my faith has been how God is present in every moment. And although that is not something that's revolutionary, perhaps, but this idea that our witnessing is what fluctuates. It's like the flicking of a light switch. We see all the shapes and colors, and then the light's off and we don't witness. And so there's this almost like with divine presence, although it doesn't have a, it's not limited by form per se, but it's like there's these moments of awareness, and then, but that presence is always there. There's a great Islamic mystic, Ibn Atala, which says that we are not veiled. Our perception is not veiled of God because of his distance, but because of his proximity. Like the Quran says that God is closer to you than your jugular vein. And so how do you witness that which gives you witnessing? How do you see your own eyes? You can't bite your own teeth, that it's so close to you. Even like we're talking about forms, but there's something that's so close to you that it's beyond the separation, and yet not you, that God is not us. And yet there's this presence that's mysterious. He's surrounding us. And I think one of the amazing interviews that really speak to this is Mother Teresa was once being interviewed, and the interviewer asked her sort of, when you pray, what do you say to God? Some of you may have heard this before, and she said, I listen. And the interviewer said, okay, and well, then what does God say? And she said, he listens. And the interviewer says, I don't understand. And she's like, if you can't understand that, I can't put it into words. And I always thought that was such a powerful articulation of no separation, like that there is this, the divine presence, divine love is just based on being present, listen, and it's there. And there's something to be said about that in even Rumi's poetry. In his first poem of the Mathnawi, his epic 6-part sort of collection, at one point he says that he's talking about intimacy, and he said, when you're far from someone, your voice is loud, right? Because you want them to hear you. But as you get closer, what happens? Your voice lowers. And then you get really close and you're whispering. And if there's a dissolving of the self, there's no more words. And so he mentions this with the word khamush, or silence. So in that silence, and that's why he has this famous poem of language of God is silence, all else is poor translation, because it's that in that silence, like infinity is held. And so the presence is really felt, which is something that I find no matter what I'm facing in life, knowing that God's presence is there, and that part of my purpose is to know myself, and through that to know him and to worship him from a place of love, and to become a representative of that love and that mercy for all people in all places without discrimination. Creates a pathway that I think is very universal. And so what I wanted to speak about today is what that actually looks like in practice, to not make it too far away or esoteric, or you go, oh, that's a beautiful idea, but what does that mean for me today in my life? So one of the ways that I've learned is that you start exactly where you are. And I talk about this in the section on the prayer of the Salat, which translates to connection, essentially, is that the prayer starts exactly where you are, 2 feet on the earth. And even when you bow, you look straight down between those 2 feet, and you realize you start in the here and now. Your relationship with God starts here. And I say that because a lot of times we think or project into the future, like, if I am just like this, if I could just do that, I could have a relationship with God. And so we hide all the things that we're shamed about almost from God, which is almost funny because he knows about them before we even realize it. But there's a sense of, we feel like we have to hide. Or if we try to deal with those things on our own, instead of going to God and, like in Jesus's words, boasting in our weakness. Like if you're going to have pride, be prideful about your fallibility or your weakness. And that puts us in the space of humility, which allows us to be in a receptive state. And so it starts exactly where we are. And so what that means is then arrives the gift of sitting with what feelings come for you, what emotions you're feeling, and tuning in with your body and checking in and saying, what am I feeling in this moment? Instead of always trying to be the version that you want to be, actually starting exactly with where you are. Because where you are is giving you the information. Rumi would say that pain is a messenger, or your emotions are messengers in the famous Guest House poem. But it's true. So if your emotions, like what are you really feeling? So if you're, for example, if you're at a store and somebody talks to you very harshly and you get angry, and then you have this emotion, anger, and usually then what you do with that emotion is you either create a judgment or a story, like based, like that person is this and that, and we create this whole story, and that story usually comes from our history. And then that story may result in an action. And it sometimes happens very quick. Sometimes it happens with friends over tea, a very long period of time. But we create these stories and these judgments. And what in the Quran, the teachings of the prophets, and some of the mystics throughout time have really taught us is, well, what if you actually just sat with what that brought up in you? One poet says, I see myself in mirrors, bodies of water, and others' reactions, like my reactions to others. Like that's how I see myself. Like, what did it pull out of me? And so I'll use another example for that too, is in the Buddhist tradition, they say when you have a little bit of earth and some water and you stir it, it's cloudy. You wait long enough and the earth settles and it's clear. But what happens is if the spoon comes back in and stirs, gets cloudy again, often our go-to is to blame the spoon for the cloudiness in us. And so when we have a response to others, they're just a spoon. Like they can't make you, they're just stirring something that's inside of you. So being present with divine love in everyday life is to say, what is this thing that's stirring me, that's preventing me from witnessing divine love? In Rumi's words, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek to find the barriers within yourself that you've built against it. So we mentioned God's closer to your jugular vein, closer than the life that makes you witness. Then it's not God who goes away or divine love that goes away. It's us that turn away our witnessing. And the word for heart in Arabic, qalb, it has that in its root, it has that turn away and turn back, turn away. It's like this experience of back and forth. And so the calling is, as humans, we're forgetful. So we turn back and remember. And so in that moment of emotion, it's striking something inside of you, unsettling you just enough, that pain unsettles you just enough to witness, to observe. And now it's asking yourself, what did I need that I didn't get? Because beneath every emotion is a need. And beneath every need is a name of God. So the origin of all our needs returns us back to God. They say in language, metaphorically, we all have a God-shaped hole we're trying to fill with anything in this world. But you can't fill infinite space. You run out of. So it's this reality of, in that need, you're turning back to the divine. And so suddenly, the person in front of you that triggered you, that agitated you, becomes the great reminder of who you have to turn your heart to and where your attachments really are. We see this in Buddhism often. Attachment, they say attachment causes suffering. Because if you attach, it's like anchoring your boat to another boat. By morning, you have no idea where you are. It's only when you anchor yourself to something that's constant that there's security. And so in this age of anxiety, why are we so anxious? Why is that one of the most common things that are diagnosed? Is because we anchor ourselves in other things that are variable and we can't control. So there's a sense of what's going to happen, but you anchor yourself to the divine and there's stability. And so in this process for myself, when I look at my emotions, however I'm feeling, I don't deny myself the judgment. I just, as my ego responds with a judgment, I take a second and I take that into repentance. And I ask for God to open up my heart to what I'm not seeing that this moment triggered in me. I remember when I was a kid and we would play, we had these paddles that like covered your hand and it was Velcro and the ball was like Velcro and you'd throw the ball and it'd stick to the paddle. And the other side of the paddle didn't have any Velcro. So if you like flipped the paddle, the ball wouldn't stick to it. It's kind of like that. If something sticks in us, it's because we have a correlating quality inside of us. Because there's many times you've experienced it where your friend may be telling you a story and you're like, that doesn't seem that bad. Because it's not something that you have to work on. There's plenty we all have to work on that's different from each other. But recognizing, accepting that truth, that when something hits me and it sticks, there is a responsibility or an opportunity to turn to God. And so then suddenly every moment of pain turns into a prayer. And through the process of you feel an emotion, you ask God what you're needing. So if somebody is speaking badly to you and you allow yourself to say, how dare them? They talk to me like this. And, people come and they say, oh, can't believe they said that to me. Why would, and then you ask them, you're like, well, what did that feel like? And they're like, I'm really angry, made me very sad. Well, why did it make you sad? Because I didn't feel safe. Oh, okay. So you're looking for safety? Yeah. And then there's this correlating quality, many qualities, but maybe it's a mu'min in the Islamic tradition. But so then you're taking your heart and you're saying, I'm actually, this lack of safety I felt in this relationship is actually my longing for an eternal safety, safeness, security. It is returning you to that which is eternal. And so in a situation where, you're heartbroken and you're, oh, how could they do it? And if you keep going and you ask, well, why, how does it feel? And they tell you, what did you want? And they keep going. It's something like, I was looking for love. And in the Islamic tradition, we have the name of a God, Al-Wadud, the origin of love. And you're taking that longing for love to the ocean of it, infinite ocean of it. And so then coming from that perspective, then if you're looking at, let's say, an alcoholic, from that perspective, you're saying every single person, no matter what they reach for, ultimately are reaching for God. So the alcoholic, if you go to an AA meeting, you'll very quickly realize when they're reaching for a bottle, it's not the bottle and it's not the contents in it. It's a feeling that they're searching for. They are looking, as one said, I'm looking for home. I'm looking for mercy. I'm looking for compassion. I'm looking for forgiveness. These are all qualities. I'm looking for Ar-Rahman, mercy. I'm looking for forgiveness, Al-Ghafur. I'm looking for kindness, Ar-Rauf. These qualities are what we're reaching for. But we land on the bottle or we land on the person, and we land on the pipe, whatever it may be. It could be addiction, it could be things that are socially acceptable. But if we land on the attachments, and ultimately those things end up breaking our heart in some way or another. Not because, for example, you may love someone, they may love you, they don't want to hurt you. But as one mystic said, I either bury you or you bury me. There is no other way. So there's some things that are out of our control. I may not want to hurt you, but there will be a time when there's separation. And so it doesn't mean that we don't have deep, loving connections with people. It doesn't mean you can't have a beautiful home and have wonderful things. It just means you recognizing that that can't fill that God-shaped hole. And using the moments that God sends you to be aware of him, and recognizing that there is no moment that's void of him, that God is as present in the house of ethics as he is in the mosque, in the church, in the synagogue. He's as present. Our awareness may not be as vivid, but he's as present. And that is such a unbelievably wonderful idea. I remember I was in the prisons and I was meeting with a few of the inmates. He was asking us questions about the world because he'd been in prison, I believe, for about 30 years. And I believe he was a lifer, going to be there till he passed away. And we explained, oh, this is on the internet and, these things, that it was far from his reality. And he said, wait a second, you guys sound like prisoners. And I'm the one that's free. And so, because he's like, I don't have to waste time focusing on anything but God. And so in the prison cell of maximum security, he was so present with the presence of God. So there's no place or space or time where God is not present. And if we use what's in front of us, we can access that. Because it's like we get to know God in the present moment. Because everything else is the past is gone and interpreted by our perception, and the future is an illusion. So it's right here that we get to know God. And he's sending us so many opportunities in the forms of people and circumstances to get to know him. And I think it's just such a gift because it allows for every moment to be holy and for it not to be so separate, I know I said a lot, and I want to just take a second to pause and see if there are any questions or if this is landing.
For those of you that might have a question, or if you want to type it in the chat or raise your hand, you can.
Sister Helwa, I'm kind of listening as if like I don't want to do anything interrupt it. You keep going on, I don't know if it's only me or the others as well. So it's wonderful.
Alhamdulillah, thank you.
I just appreciated your description, and to remember that the future is an illusion, that all we have is the present moment, and everything occurs in the present. And yeah, very much so. The understanding of when you look at the perception and the view of different things, sometimes you think there's a freedom for some people, but really there isn't. And to be able to only focus on certain things all day, there's a freedom there, even though you might not physically be able to experience what we physically think is a freedom. It's just a very interesting, different perspective. Shayla, if you'd like to go ahead and speak.
She made it the presence of God so close, so available that you cannot even think you can touch. Just my feeling. You can touch God. I mean, if you can hear it, hear him, her, or if you can feel the presence in your heart, you should be able to. I mean, I just thought it was around, like I can touch anywhere and there is God, presence there available. Just thought so. Wanted to let you everybody know that.
I liked the crossing into Buddhism some too. In our tour of faiths we do in July, for the past couple of years we've had Buddhism involved, and I've learned how Buddhism can add to things. All right, so Carl Muller asked a question in here. He said, your book is filled with references to poets and religious texts that display a considerable depth of study. What is your academic background?
Thank you for all of your reflections. I'm grateful for that. I agree. I think Buddhism has a lot of faith traditions and have a lot to teach us in terms of the different stories, myths, and teachings. It's pretty incredible, actually. That's a great question. I actually was doing a master's in, I was working towards a master's in divinity and Islamic spirituality. When this book came out of the thesis we had to submit, actually, the thesis was supposed to be really short, so I didn't really intend to write a book. It was when the calling came that happened. I felt for my teachers. They were expecting to read like 80 pages and ended up with like 300 plus. But yeah, I studied with a teacher in actually several teachers in different countries. So, but yeah, like I mentioned too, I don't attribute like anything to my own scholarship. It's just a lot of the teachers I sat with and the people that looked into this book and offered up a lot of suggestions. Actually, one of my friends, she was a Bible study major in California at Biola. Maybe some of you know at school. And she went, it was so amazing. But she went through the book because I asked her, I was like, some of you may know this, but I don't know if I said it. Maybe I said it in the book. I don't remember now, but I did go to Christian school for about 9 years. So we had church every week. So it's pretty familiar with the Bible. And yet, I mean, she's a Bible study major. So she went through the whole book and she like put Bible verses, quotes from St. Augustine. And it was really cool just to see, oh my God, this is so similar to this. And this is so similar to that. And so just having the type of people who added so much to it, I attribute a lot of the credit to them.
Sister Helwa, I was going to ask another question on top of what you already have. In your book, you extensively cover about how to connect Allah, God, through his different names. And here you also brought up emotions are in fact an indicator of a need. There's a need that the emotion comes in the form of a cry to us. And that need is in fact is beneath everything that, where there is God and one of the names of the gods. So can you really give a little kind of more details about this?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy you brought that up. Again, I think that our emotions, we've told ourselves that we're not allowed to have them. And yet they're, I think, a form of divine inspiration that comes to us. Now that seems like people are like, what do you mean? Like, what I mean is that if in every moment God is sending signs, in the Quran, there's a verse that says, from the east to the west, everywhere you look is the face of God. And in every verse of the Quran is considered an ayah, which is a sign. And if God's speech created existence, then everything is infused with this mysterious presence in some mysterious way that when we put it into words, we get into trouble because it's so beyond language. And so these emotions, we've denied ourselves from feeling. We've denied ourselves from feeling, which denies us from needing because we don't want to be needy. There is such a pushback from being needy. And in human relationships, it can cause problems. But in our relationship with the divine, that's the way we want to show up. That's the way we want to show up, needy. Because how do you experience al-Ghani, or the rich one, the one with no needs, except that you show up as the needy one? How do you experience or receive God's ability to heal? A Shafi is the name of God, unless you show up broken in a need of healing. You know, like a lot of the miracles, if you look in across traditions, the miracles, why did this Red Sea part? Didn't just part randomly, it parted in deep need and trust. You know, so when you show up that way, we're able to receive, able to get to know God. So when we deny our emotions, oh, I'm too much. Oh, I feel, you know how many times people apologize before they cry? Have you noticed that? How often before someone's eyes become clouds, like it's this beautiful thing that your emotions have this physical manifestation to help alleviate you, and you have to apologize. Why? Because we've said like that's weak. But you can't show up to the creator of existence strong. If you compare me jumping to Michael Jordan, wow, no contest, right? But if you compare me jumping to Michael Jordan and we're both reaching for the moon, minuscule difference in comparison to how far the moon is. Like our numbers are pretty close if you divide them. Because the space is so far away. Now imagine the creator of existence beyond space and time. There's a funny story of Shamsi Tabrizi. It's like these funny stories of Rumi's teacher, guide, friend. And it's like a imaginary kind of, a poet writes about it. And on the day of judgment, everyone's like, oh God, like, we hope you forgive us. And they're all like bowing to God and asking for forgiveness and mercy and kindness. And the story is like Shams kind of, stomps in and he's like, God, I have something you don't have that I want to bring to the table. And everyone's like, oh my God, what is he going to say? And he's like, I bring you my lack. I bring you my brokenness because you don't have brokenness and you don't have lack. I bring you my poverty. Like he was boasting in his weakness. It's a story of that's how we show up to God. But churches and mosques and synagogues and temples have sometimes become places where we pretend we're doing okay and we're perfect. Instead of like more like a clinic or like a hospital where we're like, oh man, like I'm really struggling. Doesn't mean you can't be doing great. It just means you're authentic. Because how do you expect God to heal who you're pretending to be? To show up how you are. It's like going to a doctor and lying about all your symptoms. Obviously, the divine, it's a bad example because how do you relate to God? Like, how could I? But for ourselves. So when we allow our emotions and we're like, this is how I feel sad. We allow ourselves, or I feel angry, or I feel heartbroken, or feel scared. And everyone's like, you can't be scared. People are going to have their opinion, but I feel scared. And my fear or my scaredness is maybe how God's pulling me to him, to lean on him in a deeper way. So if we could take, then suddenly it becomes a gift. It's the same thing. That person that triggers you, that says that thing or does this thing or acts in that way, like, what are they showing me about myself? If God doesn't make mistakes, why did he put them in my life, in my way? Must be a reason. If I believe that God does things intentionally, what am I meant to learn? Am I meant to learn patience? Am I meant to learn how to forgive? If God forgives the unforgivable in me, can't I offer that to somebody else? One teacher says it funny. He says, you realize how we always pray for justice when it comes to others hurting us, but we always pray for mercy when it comes to us wronging others? Like, make it even, you know? And so going back to the point of our emotions and the people we meet become in the ways we get triggered, either in extreme joy or extreme pain, or reflecting something in us, and are eventually leading us to a need or a prayer. And in the Islamic tradition, a popular way of, or common among certain circles, is like taking it to dhikr or remembrance, which is remembering the name of God, calling upon that quality of God. You see that in the Jewish tradition as well, and you see that in chanting traditions in Buddhism, calling upon that quality of God, that name or that resonance, and you're putting your attention and awareness, reminding yourself that this is a drop I'm seeking, but there's a whole ocean. So I'm turning to that ocean. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I have a couple of things in the chat, and I know we have about 15 minutes, so I want to make sure I touch on these. First, Reverend Mary Finklia just was sharing her thought. She said, mentioning our desires as veiled longings for God, it reminded me of the verse from Isaiah regarding why do you labor for things that do not satisfy? So often we chase after things we think will bring peace, but they are poor substitutes for that which truly brings peace, contentment, etc. Thank you for bringing that back to my attention. That was what she wanted to thank you on.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Bob has a question, and so does Carl. Bob's question was if you would care to give your opinion on the strongest arguments for and against evolution and creationism. That was Bob's question. And I will tell you just quickly what Carl was asking. There are various translations of the Bible. Is there a translation of the Quran that you regard as best? If so, why? Just in case you want to answer one or tie them together or anything.
Thank you so much. I think that there's many. It's hard just because similar to Hebrew or triliteral languages that have triliteral root systems, it's like one word breaks out into many possible meanings. So like, for example, the word for used for intellect, aql, it like the root system has a root that says it's like tethering an animal. So it has such deeper meaning than just intellect, meaning like the intellect is that thing that tethers the desires in this context, and it keeps going and going. So it becomes tricky. So I tend to, if you're gonna look at a translation, look at a few, but I like Abdul Halim. It's like the Oxford classic. It's easy to, there's no Arabic, so you can just kind of read all the way through. If you're looking for like some notes, it's a bit of a chunkier book. I like Yahya Emmerich, like an orange looking book. And if you want to see the Arabic alongside with notes, I like Muhammad Assad. I can type those because I realized they're that's a lot of Arabic names.
I was thinking Keith might be able to type them in there.
Yes, I can find and send a link through the chat. No problem.
Okay.
I might not have all those spelled correctly, but yeah, in terms of maybe evolution will be like another talk if we have the gift of doing that. I have the gift of doing that with you, just because I'd hate to give the topic like a quick 5 minutes. But I think it's a really good question, and I actually think it would be really interesting because I do see that it feels like this group is very steeped in faith and saw a few reverends. So it'd be really, I feel like it'd be a lovely conversation that I'd love to have, just for the sake of time, if you would permit me to yeah.
Absolutely, because I can understand the giving. I would think that actually the conversation of evolution and creationism probably warrants more than touching on it for just a few minutes.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty remarkable too, because you don't it's a conversation that I think can be very beautiful. So I'd like to give it, yeah.
You know, I can totally see that.
Sister
Any,
Helwa, Kristen, can I have a comment if you don't mind? I know majority of our audiences tonight, they are non-Muslims, and you are a Muslim, and the book is a spiritual journey into the heart of Islam. As you know, Islam, especially in the West, is perceived more with violence rather than the love. So we hear a lot the concept of love in the church. Definitely our Christian fellows, they are putting a lot of emphasis on the love, rightfully, absolutely. So how do you what's your opinion in terms of what Islam has been perceived in the United States versus what you have learned through your studies about Islam's compatibility with love versus violence or terrorism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I realized very early on that learning a tradition and understanding it and not confusing it with one group's version of it or a practice of it or a perception of it. So, if you look at Islamic history, what it did for the Renaissance, actually, when you talk about evolution, it's interesting because there's a lot of even Darwin ideas, like a lot of it was remixed from a particular Islamic scholar. Like, it's actually really interesting that's why the question of evolution is fascinating to me. But it's very short history, like the Islamic history. If you look at say 1400, 1500 years, a lot of this quote violence is within maybe 60, 70, 80 years with radicalized groups. And Islam is as in terms of Islamic tradition, the Quran, the Hadith, the examples of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is unbelievably against it. But it's hard when someone shows up on the news and says, I'm Muslim and this is what I'm doing, and this is what religion says to do. Kind of like me showing up on the news and saying, I'm a bird, but I can't fly and I don't have feathers. So that's what it feels like to me. I'm like, how is this? Where did you get that from? And so then when you realize when you actually there was this huge study that came out and from Harvard, actually, and it was like 500 pages from all these scholars, and they were doing this like deep dive on terrorism and correlation with Islam, and it was like this unbelievable percentage correlated with political in these terrorist acts, and the person's like taking on the religion as the reason for why. And you see that too in, like, you know, if you some of these things that happen with the Lord's Resistance Army and in the continent of Africa, they're using Bible verses to get kids to be child soldiers. I would never say that's Christianity, because I went to church for 9 years and read the Bible. I'm like, what? Where did you get that from? You could say it's that, but it doesn't match up, you know, with the traditions and the teachings. And so you just look at the example of the prophet, peace be upon his life. Like, if that person is considered by every Muslim the embodiment of the religion, why didn't he do that? Like, so it's really interesting. Even if it's interesting when you look at some of the wars they were in, it was like 17-person casualty. Like it was a small, even the wars where they were being thrown out of their home and they were protecting themselves. It was such a small casualty. Like the casualties were so small. Like when we think of war in the West and Islam, sometimes people relate it to the religion, and it literally has such strict restrictions. You can't put fire on land, like meaning you can't blow stuff up. You can't kill civilians and women and children. It can only be fought in defense. There's so much that I'm like, oh, this person's not following any of these rules, you know? So I think that for me, it's remembering that this is the tradition that, you know, there was a mystic, and his teacher asked him and his students, go pick a flower for me, the most beautiful flower you can find, and bring it. And the teacher asked the students because the students were wondering why he preferred one particular student over the rest. So all the students left and they came with the most beautiful flowers. And this student we preferred over the rest came with a dead rose. And everyone laughed at him, like, how embarrassing. Your teacher asked you for something and you bring something dead. And the teacher asked him, why did you bring that? And he said, because when I went to every flower, they were in remembrance of God. And I couldn't get myself to stop their remembrance. And then I found this one whose remembrance was finished. Meaning that there's this deep honor of conscious life, of a flower even. Like, what would it be to like a human being? That there's this deep, like, that's the tradition. That came from the prophet, peace be upon him, is like the way he moved through the world. And so it's heartbreaking as a Muslim. It's really hard because you see people hijack your religion, and then you have to like stand up for something that you know your faith. Like you have to like fight for the version that is your faith, you know? So it's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Thank you. Cheryl has a thought. She said she really likes the thought about prayer starts where you are. Don't pretend to be somewhere else, because God already knows you and where you are. Susan had a question. She was curious if you were raised as Muslim or Christian.
Great question. I get that one a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was actually born and raised as a Muslim, but my parents had my mom went to Catholic school and in America, and she just really wanted us to have God in our everyday life. And so they put us in private Christian schools, me and my brother. And I absolutely love that they did. It's just nice to make life in the context of the divine. And I learned so much, and it was such a blessing. Deeply.
I can see it can give you multiple varying perspectives of faith in God. Hold on. Shayla Young said, very nice, heartfelt answer with flower example. Thank you. I was curious actually why. I was waiting to learn to see why he brought the dead rose. And then Reverend Finklia said, your comments about defending the faith from those who would hijack it reminds me of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Stand Against Hitler. We have 2 minutes left. So if you have any final thoughts, I would let you, I don't really think we should take any more questions. I think I'd rather just hear final thoughts.
Thank you so much for everyone who came on this call and shared and reflected. I learned a lot, just even from your spirits, those who held the space. The one thing I learned is, in like scientifically, every breath we breathe carries a molecule or an atom of every breath that was ever taken. And so even as we sit here and breathing together, we breathe in an atom of Jesus's breath, Moses's breath, Noah, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. And to me, that's remarkable, and all those who've passed and all those who will come. And there's something that connects us no matter where we are when we breathe. And that's such a gift and such a reminder, such a wonderful reminder. And in the context of divine love in everyday life, since it sounds like there's a lot of Christians on this call, I wanted to share something I love from the Gnostic, like the Abbas, the Christian Abbas. And there was a man, he went to go visit a Christian, like desert father, and he went up the little mountaintop, and he came inside, and he's like, he looked around, he's like, where are your books? Like, where's your Bible? And that, the desert father looked at him, and he took his hand and he took him outside, and he was like, this is my Bible. And he pointed to the valley and the river and the sky. And he's like, I read God's word every day. And so, I don't know, I guess I wanted to leave you with that visual of the fact that everything that surrounds you, came about. Yes, a human being cut the wood, but where'd that tree come from? And where'd the seed of the tree come from? And from God. And so it's holding its form together because God wills it. And there's something so beautiful about, no matter where you are, being able to look out and see that there's revelation around me. I also thank you, Christina, and the Atlantic Institute for making space for me to come and be with you. It's a gift. And I'm sending you all my prayers for any silent burden that you may be carrying. I pray that God lightens your burden. And I pray that every moment, no matter what you're faced with, you remember who's speaking to you. And like Mother Teresa said, you can listen, knowing that he listens too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to go ahead and thank you all for joining us tonight. It is about 7:30. If you guys would like to unmute yourselves and say good evening, you can. If you'd like to, thank you very much, Sister Helwa. Just so you know, Reverend Mary Finklia said, Luther says the gospel is written in the trees and in the stars. Thanks for reminding us of God and at the work of God's work all around us. And Bob said, your book is one of my favorites. I think it's something everyone should read.
Thank you so much.
So we thank you all for joining with us tonight. And we will keep you informed of what comes next. And don't want to say much of anything else.
Thank you. Thank you to
Thank
everyone.
you.
The beautiful